So let's take a closer look at how to set up a spindle. Hello fellow CNCnutz and welcome. In my last few videos I showed mounting the spindle onto my machine and then making my first cut with it. This time I'm going to go a bit more into depth about the spindle and how I set it up, including the VFD that drives it. Now let me start off by saying that by no stretch of the imagination am I an expert on spindles and VFDs. I've really only had this for a very short while. I've only done one cut with it, but I do have it on my machine and I've managed to make it work in conjunction with Mach 3 and CNC. Seems to work perfectly fine. That said, please be aware that if you set up the VFD with incorrect parameters, you can destroy either the spindle or the VFD. In my search around the internet to try and find documentation on how to set it up, I really didn't find much that was very satisfactory. So I'm going to try and show you here what the settings are in mine, how I program it, and also how to set up a simple hand control that allows you to turn on the spindle and adjust its speed. The settings used for this are exactly the same as they are if I connect it to my Gecko drive and control it from my laptop. I'm going to break this up into several episodes. I'm going to first of all show you the most basic setup. That's the one I have here now with using a simple hand control. Following that, I'll show you how to interface it with the likes of a Gecko G540 drive and set up Mach 3 and CNC to control it. Basically, again, turn it on and off and adjust its speed. Now I also have on order a Modbus or RS485 USB interface. That will allow me to talk directly to the VFD via two wires. It will make setting the whole thing up even simpler than interfacing it with the Gecko drive. And that will suit pretty much everyone, and ultimately is probably how I will be running my drive. But we're going to start off simple, a basic setup. Now you can control the VFD spindle speed, turn it on and off and adjust its speed from the actual controller interface on the front of the VFD. But given how simple it is to set up one of these here, I see absolutely no reason why you would want to do it from the VFD itself. It's much more convenient to have a hand control. So I'm not even going to worry about showing you how to run it from the front face of the VFD, but we'll move straight to the hand control settings. Let's have a bit more in-depth look at it. Here we have the spindle. It's basically a 3-phase motor and it has a 4-pin plug on top. It also came with this 4-pin socket. Now when I received this, only 3 of the pins here were actually connected. The 4th one was not connected to anything, and I wasn't very happy about that. I want this here to be grounded for safety. And I don't want to be grounding it through the machine itself. I want this to be grounded so that if it's not sitting on the machine, it's still grounded. So what I did is I soldered a wire to the unused pin, tapped a small hole in the body of the spindle and attached a wire to it. Now the body of this here is grounded for safety. I installed a cable, a 4-core cable, and I also made sure that this metal body here is also grounded, again for safety. It really is important, especially in this country anyway, that items like this here are grounded for electrical safety. Now ideally the cable used should be a screened cable, but I was unable to get screened cable for this, so I'm just using a 4-core cable that gives me my 3-phase and earth to the spindle. I have found a source of the appropriate cable in the US, and I'll put a link on my website to where you can obtain it. Let's have a look at the other end of this cable. So here we have the VFD. It's turned off at the moment, and as you can see I've put a fuse in here. This is the mains. I've put a fuse into the phase of it in case something goes wrong. It's protected. Here is the little control panel that you can use to read the speed, start, stop, and adjust its speed as well using this little control knob here. You also program it from here. Now, as I said, I'm not interested in controlling mine from one of these here. You're far better off having a simple hand control unit. So here's the front control panel on the VFD. From here you can actually press the run key to start your spindle. Mine has a little knob on it, though not all do, and you can use that to increase or decrease the speed, and of course you can stop it. When it's running, you can also look at other parameters. Using the shift key here, you can look at the frequency that the spindle's running at, how much current is being drawn, in this case 1 amp, and its speed. And then you can push the stop key to stop it. You can also go into programming mode using the program button. And you can look at the various parameters. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to wire up the VFD to the spindle. Now because my VFD is already mounted and wired up, I don't want to pull it apart, but even if I did, it's still going to be virtually impossible to show you how it's all wired up because everything is so tightly packed into the VFD. So to help, what I've done is I've created this sheet here. It shows a wiring diagram of how to connect the motor and the mains to the spindle. I also created this sheet here, which gives a little bit more detail showing the layout of the terminals in the VFD. Also, where you can purchase the shielded cable for the VFD. I've put both of these documents on my website, so if you want to see them, go to my website and download them. Now when we look at the drawing, we'll see several things. Concentrating first on the cable between the VFD and the spindle, we have 3 wires that actually go to the windings on the spindle, and they connect to the U, the V and the W of the VFD. Now it doesn't matter which of those wires connects to which wires on the spindle. It makes absolutely no difference. It's a 3-phase motor. If when you get it up and running though you find that the spindle is running backwards, swap any 2 of them. For instance, swap the U and the W, and then the spindle will turn in the opposite direction. Now the other thing you'll notice is the earth wire goes through and connects to the body of the spindle, but the shielding, which also connects to the earth, does not connect to the spindle at all. So that's important. The shielding should not continue its way through to the spindle. It basically makes its way through as far as the plug and it stops. Now the other thing Looking at the mains side of it, we actually have 3 terminals. I've only drawn 2. In New Zealand we have 230 volt mains, and so that's what I've drawn my diagram for. I believe in the US you can also get 220 volt mains, which is what these VSDs usually run on. So there are 3 terminals there, the R, S and T. You can connect your 220 volts to any of those 3 terminals. I've chosen to use the R and the T because they're placed furthest apart. The S is in the center. I just wanted a bit more spacing between my phase and neutral. The earth wire connects to the earth terminal, which ultimately connects to the spindle and the cable shield. One thing I did do is I put a fuse into the VFD. I put a fuse in the phase, and I put a low value fuse in there, around about 3 amps. I wanted a low value fuse while I was getting it configured, so that if I made a mistake in my configuration, it would blow the fuse and save both my spindle and VFD. As I mentioned earlier, if you set the parameters wrong, these things can draw a horrific amount of current and cause damage to either the spindle, the VFD, or both. So one last thing, when doing wiring for mains electricity, check out your local regulations. What is relevant to me in my country may not be relevant to you in yours. So check out those regulations and follow how it should be done in your country. Now the next bit is, having completed the spindle wiring of the mains and the wire to the spindle, you now have the most basic functioning spindle you can get. You can turn it on and off and adjust its speed from the front face control of the VFD. Now that's not really convenient. In my case, it's below the table and a nuisance to work. In other cases, people may have them mounted on the wall, and that would be a good location. You can see what speed it's actually running at. But a hand controller, something similar to this in a box. It's very simple, just a switch and a potentiometer, variable resistor, a 10K resistor. And to make it easy, I've created this drawing here, which shows the VFD and the wiring to both the switch and the 10K pot. It requires only 5 wires, so simple to do. It only took me probably about 10 minutes to whip that there up, a little bit longer if I was actually trying to do it properly. And you've got something you can have on your tabletop that you can use. It'll be convenient. So I personally recommend go ahead and at the very least set up a manual hand control for your VFD. I'll put this drawing on my website so you can download it and make your own hand control. Next we need to move on to programming the VFD. Now quite handily, the VFD comes with a manual, and it's a really nice printed manual. The only problem with it is it's entirely in Chinese and therefore useless. I have downloaded an English version of the manual, which is easily readable but not that easy to understand. Before turning the VFD on for the first time, make sure you unplug the spindle. Programming is done using only 5 keys. We have a program key, a set key, 2 arrow keys and the shift key. The program key takes us into programming mode and out again. Once we're in programming mode, it brings up the last registry we were looking at, and pressing the set key takes us into that registry. As we can see here, we have a value of 1. Pushing the set key again saves that value and steps us on to the next registry. We can use the arrow keys to change what registry number we want to look at. If you leave it too long, it jumps out of programming mode altogether. So I'm just going to push the program button again, and I'm going to dial in registry 141. So I'm going to use the arrow key to take the value down here to 1. I can use the shift key now, which will start the digit in the tens column flashing, and I can use the up arrow key to take me to 4. If I wanted to go down, I would use the down arrow key. I now push the shift key again and put a 1 in here. That takes me to register 141. I'll go set, and I've got a value of 220. That registry actually has the motor's rated voltage. So as you can see, it's set to 220 volts. Again, if you leave it too long, it will jump out of programming mode, but simply push the program key again and it takes you back to the registry you were looking at. I can go set. I can make whatever change I want to that value, and as you can see, the voltage goes down in this particular instance into 0.1 of a volt, and when I've got the correct voltage I can just push set and it will step me on to the next registry. Now, programming these here are pretty much the same across the entire range from this particular manufacturer. What differs are the voltage ratings, power ratings of the VFDs, and of course the same applies to the spindles. Different voltage ratings, power ratings, current ratings, frequency of operation. You need to enter all this information into your VFD. Only then can you turn it on and with the spindle connected and run your spindle. And as I said earlier, just put a lower value fuse in the VFD in case you've got it horribly wrong. It'll blow the fuse and then you can go back and figure out where things have gone wrong. Now, there is a few important things I found when I was doing mine, and I've written a bit of a document here on it that shows some important notes. It also notes down when I wrote this document, which version of the document it is, what my VFD and spindle actually is, and some other notes about setting things up. Also included in it a list of the 186 registers that this thing has in it, and the ones that I actually changed from default to make this work for me. Now, there are a couple of things I did find. First of all, registry 13, if you enter a value of 8 into that, will default the VFD back to factory settings. If you do want to do that, you obviously need to do that first. There's no point programming the rest of it up and then doing that at the end. You're back where you started. Likewise, you can lock the values once you're finished. Registry 0, if you enter a value of 1 in there, will lock it so that you can only go through and read the values that are set in the VFD. And I recommend once you've gone through and made all your changes, then lock the VFD and then step through and read all the registries that you've changed and make sure they have the values that you want in them. Now, last but not least, one little snag I found was to do with registries 3, 4 and 5, and these are pretty critical registries. Registries 3 and 4 set the main frequency and base frequency of the VFD using the information from your motor. I've got a 400 Hertz motor, so I have to set those to 400 Hertz. You actually need to set registry 5 first, which is the maximum frequency, and then go back and set registries 3 and 4. I found that I was unable to change the values to 400 Hertz until I'd done registry 5. So that's something to be very careful of, because if you don't get some of this stuff right, you can damage the VFD or the spindle or both. So do be very careful. If you're lucky, the person who sold you the kit will have it all pre-programmed for you, but I don't know whether they do or not. I brought all my components separately, so I've had to figure it out and set it up myself. I'll add this document to my website so that you can have a look at it and then set it up to suit your machine. Remember, these come in varying voltages and current ratings. Likewise, the same for the spindles. So there we have it. I've basically shown you the process by which you program it, how to use those buttons, and with the aid of the documentation I've got here, you should be able to work out what you need to put in your VFD. Once you've got it programmed up correctly, reattach the cable and give it a spin. Hopefully it'll work really well for you. Now let me just state here again that my only qualifications on how to program this is the fact that this has not yet burst into flames. I've only just got it, and this is what I've done to get mine going. This documentation is for my spindle VFD combination, but you should be able to see enough in here to work out what it should be for yours. Just make sure you go through and check the settings are correct for your setup, not mine. Now I'll put all this documentation, the drawings, the spindle setup and everything on my website, www.CNCnutz.com. I'll put a link in the description box below to the specific page for this particular video. So check it out and you should be able to find that information that you require there. In an upcoming video, I'm going to show you how to set this up to work with Mach 3 and UC CNC. I've already got it working on mine. I have it interfaced to my Gecko drive, and I'm going to show you how I did that. Later on, when my Modbus adapter arrives, I'm going to show you how to do that as well. And I think that will become the standard for how I'll be doing mine, and I think most people will find that the easiest way of controlling the spindle through Mach 3 and UC CNC. In the meantime, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you later. Cheers! One last thing. If there's enough interest in how to build a hand controller, I'll build a proper one of these here and do a video of it. That's if you want to control the VFD spindle combination manually. Bye!